September 15th, 1940, 11:47 in the morning, 22,000 feet above the Kent countryside. Pilot Officer Colin Gray had a Messerschmitt Bf 109 dead in his sights, 400 yards, closing fast. The German pilot hadn't seen him yet. Gray's thumb hovered over the firing button, 3 seconds to kill range. Suddenly, the Messerschmitt's nose dropped into a steep dive. Gray followed, pushed his stick forward, felt the negative G lift him against his harness straps. His Rolls-Royce Merlin engine coughed once, and died. The propeller windmilled uselessly in the slipstream. The gun sight drifted off target. 1,030 horsepower, gone in an instant. Gray cursed under his breath. He knew exactly what had happened. Every RAF pilot knew. The carburetor had flooded. The engine had starved for 2 seconds, maybe 3. His Spitfire was now a glider. The Messerschmitt pulled out of its dive and vanished into the clouds. The German didn't even look back. He didn't need to. He knew the British couldn't follow. Gray's engine restarted with a rough cough. His 5th kill had escaped, not because of superior German skill, but because of a flaw in British engineering. He landed at Biggin Hill 20 minutes later and filled out the same maintenance report he'd filed twice before. Engine cut out during negative G maneuver. Duration 2.3 seconds. Enemy aircraft escaped. That report would join 2,300 others in a filing cabinet at the Air Ministry. 2,300 documented engine failures during the Battle of Britain alone. 2,300 moments when British pilots were helpless in the sky. Somewhere in that stack of reports was the answer to why so many young men weren't coming home. But finding the answer wasn't the problem. The problem was that nobody could fix it. Nobody, except a woman working alone in a laboratory at Farnborough. A woman most of the RAF had never heard of. Her name was Beatrice Schilling, and she was about to break every rule in the Air Ministry to save their lives. The flaw was brutally simple. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the heart of every Spitfire and Hurricane, used an SU carburetor with a float chamber. In normal flight, gravity pulled fuel down into the engine. The system worked perfectly on a calm training sortie. But combat wasn't normal flight. When a pilot pushed the nose down into a dive, negative G-forces threw everything upward, including the fuel. The fuel surged to the top of the float chamber. The float dropped to the bottom. The needle valve opened wide. Fuel flooded the system and drowned the supercharger. The engine died. 1 second, sometimes 2, sometimes long enough for a Messerschmitt to circle back and put 20mm cannon shells through your cockpit. The Germans had no such problem. Their Daimler-Benz DB601 engine used direct fuel injection, no float chamber, no flooding. A Bf 109 pilot could roll inverted, dive vertically, pull negative G for 10 seconds straight. His engine never missed a heartbeat. Luftwaffe tacticians figured this out within weeks of the first engagements. Their solution was elegant. When a British fighter gets on your tail, dive. The Spitfire will follow. Its engine will cut out. You escape, or you turn and kill him while he's helpless. They called it the English disease. They exploited it in every single dogfight. Fighter Command knew about the problem. They'd known since 1937. Engineers at the Royal Aircraft Establishment had written reports, filed recommendations, proposed modifications. Nothing happened. The Air Ministry had other priorities: production schedules, budget debates, arguments about whether the problem was really as serious as the engineers claimed. Then came the Battle of Britain. Between July and October 1940, RAF pilots documented engine cutouts in 43% of diving attacks. 43%, nearly half of every aggressive maneuver ended with a dead engine. Squadron commanders estimated 80 to 100 pilot deaths were directly caused by the carburetor flaw. Men who had Germans in their sights, men who did everything right, men who died because their engines betrayed them at the worst possible moment. Rolls-Royce was working on a solution, a pressure carburetor. a complete redesign of the fuel system using injection principles similar to the German engines. Estimated completion, late 1943. The RAF couldn't wait 3 years. They were losing pilots faster than they could train replacements. Every week, experienced men were dying because of a float chamber designed for peacetime flying. The file landed on Beatrice Schilling's desk in November 1940. Principal Technical Officer, Carburetor Research and Development, the only female engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment. She read the combat reports, she studied the maintenance logs, she interviewed pilots who'd survived engine failures. She understood the problem within a week. Solving it would take her 4 months. Testing it would risk her entire career. Beatrice Schilling wasn't supposed to be an engineer. She was born in 1909 in a small town in Hampshire. Her father was a butcher. Girls from families like hers became secretaries, nurses, or shopkeepers. Schilling had other plans. At 14, she bought a broken motorcycle with money saved from odd jobs. Her parents thought she wanted to ride it. She wanted to understand it. She stripped the engine down to its smallest components, learned what each part did, and rebuilt it on her bedroom floor, better than it was before. At 25, she raced that motorcycle at Brooklands, averaging 106 miles per hour around the concrete banking. She earned the British Motorcycle Racing Club Gold Star, one of only 3 women in history to receive it. Racing taught her something textbooks couldn't: how engines behaved under stress, when they failed, why they failed, how to feel a problem before the gauges showed it. Now she was the RAF's carburetor specialist, and their carburetors were killing pilots. The solution came to her in January 1941. Simple physics. If the problem was too much fuel during negative G, restrict the fuel flow. Not completely, just enough to prevent flooding. The engine would still get what it needed, just not enough to drown. A brass disc with a hole in the center. Install it in the fuel line before the carburetor. Size the hole to allow exactly enough fuel for maximum power and nothing more. She machined the first prototype herself, tested 17 different hole sizes, ran simulations for 6 weeks. The optimal diameter, 0.04 inches. Bench tests were perfect. Engine cutouts dropped from 2 seconds to a fraction of a heartbeat, too brief to matter in combat. But bench tests weren't combat. Schilling needed to test it in an actual dogfight. The problem was authorization. Installing unauthorized modifications on RAF aircraft was a court-martial offense. The Air Ministry required 6 months of testing, review committees, safety certifications, paperwork that would take longer to complete than pilots had left to live. Schilling had 6 brass restrictors and a decision to make. She could wait for authorization, follow procedure, do everything by the book, or she could save lives now and face the consequences later. On March 17, 1941, Schilling loaded her Norton motorcycle with tools and restrictors and rode 40 miles through the English countryside to RAF Biggin Hill. The morning patrols were being prepared. Ground crews swarmed over Spitfires and Hurricanes, checking engines, loading ammunition. Schilling found the chief mechanic, a sergeant named Harris, who'd been maintaining Merlin engines since before the war. 16 years of experience, hands that knew every bolt and wire in the Merlin by touch. She showed him the brass disc, explained the physics, and told him she needed to install it in an aircraft without authorization, without paperwork, without anyone in command knowing. Harris turned the restrictor over in his oil-stained fingers. Such a small thing, such a simple thing. How do you know it works? Bench tests, 6 weeks of them, perfect results every time. Bench tests aren't combat. I know, that's why I'm here. Harris looked at the Spitfires on the flight line, young pilots climbing into cockpits, young men who trusted their engines to keep them alive. I've lost 11 pilots to engine cutouts, 11 good men. Peterson, Williams, that Scottish lad, MacLeod, couldn't have been more than 20 years old. He looked at Schilling, looked at the restrictor in his hand. If this thing works, I don't care if the king himself hasn't authorized it. He picked up his welding kit and walked toward the nearest Spitfire. Flight Lieutenant Al Deer was one of the most experienced pilots in Fighter Command. New Zealander, 54 combat missions, 7 confirmed kills. He'd been shot down twice, survived a mid-air collision, walked away from a crash landing that should have killed him. He'd also reported engine failure 4 times, all during diving attacks, all in the last 3 months. On March 17th, his Spitfire was the first aircraft fitted with Schilling's restrictor. He didn't know it. Nobody told him. If the modification failed, Schilling wanted the blame to fall on her, not on a pilot who'd had no choice in the matter. Harris welded the restrictor into the fuel line in less than 2 minutes, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Deer climbed into the cockpit at 07:15, standard morning patrol, 2 hours over the channel, watching for German formations. Schilling stood at the edge of the airfield. Her heart was pounding, her hands were still. If the restrictor worked, Deer would never notice anything different. If it failed, if it starved the engine, if the weld cracked, if the hole was the wrong size, Deer would fall out of the sky, and Schilling would spend the rest of her life knowing she'd killed him. The Spitfire's Merlin roared to life. Deer taxied to the runway, released brakes, accelerated, lifted off. Schilling watched him climb until the aircraft was a speck against the gray English sky. Then she waited. The minutes crawled past. Each one felt like an hour. She paced the edge of the airfield, checked her watch obsessively, calculated fuel consumption in her head. 2 hours of patrol, maybe 2.5 if Deer extended. Ground crews moved around her. Mechanics worked on other aircraft. The war continued as if nothing unusual was happening. For them, nothing was. For Schilling, everything was. She'd tested engine modifications before, published papers, attended conferences, but she'd never gambled a man's life on her work, never sent someone into combat with a piece of equipment that existed only because she believed it would work. Belief wasn't proof, and if she was wrong, belief wouldn't bring Deer back. Harris found her at the 1-hour mark, brought her a cup of tea. She took it but didn't drink. Her stomach was too knotted for tea. "He's a good pilot," Harris said. "Best in the squadron. If anyone can test your gadget properly, it's him." Schilling nodded. She'd chosen Deer for exactly that reason. Experienced, aggressive, the kind of pilot who'd push into a dive without hesitation. The kind who'd find out fast whether the restrictor worked or didn't. 90 minutes. The patrol should be ending soon. Deer would be turning back toward Biggin Hill. If everything had gone normally, if his engine hadn't failed over the channel, if he wasn't floating in a life jacket right now watching his Spitfire sink into the cold gray water, if he wasn't already dead. 2 hours and 17 minutes later, Deer's Spitfire appeared over the airfield. Schilling saw it first. She'd been watching the sky so long her eyes ached. 1 aircraft, no smoke, no damage. Deer landed smoothly, taxied to dispersal, cut his engine, and climbed out of the cockpit. He was grinning. Pilots didn't grin after routine patrols. They looked tired, tense, relieved to be alive. Deer looked like a man who'd just discovered a secret. Harris reached him first. "Any problems with the engine, sir?" Deer pulled off his helmet. "Problems? That was the best the Merlin's ever run." He'd encountered 2 BF-109s over the channel. They'd spotted him, turned to engage, then dived when he got behind them, the standard German escape tactic. Deer had followed, full -G, stick pushed forward, the dive that should have killed his engine. The Merlin never stuttered, full power through the entire maneuver. Deer had closed to 150 yards before the German pilots realized something was wrong. He'd hit one of them, watched pieces fly off the Messerschmitt's tail. The German had limped toward France, trailing smoke. First confirmed damage Deer had scored in a diving attack since August. "I don't know what maintenance did to this aircraft, but I want it done to every Spitfire in the squadron." Harris looked at Schilling. Schilling looked at the ground. "I think that can be arranged, sir." Word spread through Fighter Command like wildfire. Biggin Hill installed restrictors in every aircraft within 48 hours. Pilots reported flawless engine performance. Diving attacks that would have ended in failure now ended in kills. Squadron commanders from Hornchurch, Kenley, Tangmere, and North Weald and Manston called. What did Biggin Hill do to their engines? How do we get it? The Air Ministry found out within a week. Schilling expected fury. She expected court-martial threats. She expected her career to end. Instead, she got a phone call. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commander of 11 Group, the man responsible for every fighter squadron defending London and southeast England. "Miss Schilling," he said, "I've just read the combat reports from Biggin Hill. I'm told you're responsible." Schilling braced herself. "Yes, sir." "How fast can you install this device in every aircraft and fighter command?" Schilling blinked. "Sir? You heard me. How fast?" She did the math in her head. 43 stations, 3,000 engines. If she trained installation teams at each base, worked around the clock, prioritized frontline squadrons, 6 weeks, maybe 5 if Rolls-Royce could manufacture the restrictors fast enough. 4, Park said. "You have 4. I'll handle the authorization. You handle the installation. Don't let me down." Schilling assembled a team of 3 engineers and rode her Norton to every fighter station in southern England. Biggin Hill was just the beginning. Then Hornchurch, Kenley, Tangmere, Northweald, Manston, Hawkinge, Gravesend, Croydon, 43 stations in 4 weeks. She plotted her route like a military campaign, hit the frontline squadrons first, worked outward from there. She trained ground crews personally, demonstrated the installation procedure, supervised the first fittings at each base, checked every weld, measured every hole diameter, rejected any restrictor that didn't meet her specifications. She slept in hangars when there was time to sleep, ate sandwiches on her motorcycle when there wasn't, rode through spring rain and occasional German bombs. Some stations welcomed her. The pilots at Hornchurch lined up to shake her hand after their first successful diving attacks with a restrictor. Others didn't know what to make of her. A woman giving orders to their mechanics, a civilian telling RAF personnel how to modify their aircraft. At one station, a wing commander refused to authorize the installation, told her to come back when she had proper paperwork from the Air Ministry. Schilling pulled out Air Vice Marshal Park's direct authorization. The wing commander went pale. The installation proceeded without further objection. At another station, a young pilot asked her what she'd done to deserve such an important job. She said, "I'm good at it," she said simply. He thought about that for a moment, then he nodded. "Fair enough." By April 20th, every Spitfire and Hurricane and Fighter Command had a restrictor fitted. 2,847 Merlin engines, 4 weeks of non-stop work. The device needed an official name. The RAE called it the RAE restrictor. The pilots called it something else. Sir Stanley Hooker, chief engineer at Rolls-Royce, gave the nickname that stuck. Miss Schilling's Orifice. Crude RAF humor. Schilling didn't mind. If a dirty joke helped pilots remember who saved them, she'd take it. The results were immediate and undeniable. Fighter Command tracked every statistic, every engagement, every kill, every loss. March 1931, before the restrictor, engine cutouts in 41% of diving attacks, kill-to-loss ratio 1.4 to 1. 51 British fighters lost, 73 German aircraft destroyed. April 1931, after the restrictor, engine cutouts in 0.3% of diving attacks, kill-to-loss ratio 3.1 to 1. 27 British fighters lost, 84 German aircraft destroyed. The transformation was measurable. Pilot confidence changed overnight. Men who'd hesitated to commit to dives now pressed their attacks without a second thought. Flight Lieutenant Robert Stanford Tuck, one of the RAF's top aces, described the change in a letter to his family. "It's like flying a different aircraft. Before, every dive was a gamble. Would the engine keep running or wouldn't it? You'd hesitate for just a moment, and that moment could kill you. Now there's no hesitation. The Merlin runs perfectly no matter what I do. I can fight the way I've always wanted to fight." Flight Officer Johnny Johnson, who would become the RAF's top-scoring ace, flew his first combat missions in April. "The older pilots told me about the engine failures. They said you had to be careful in a dive. Your Merlin might quit on you. By the time I started flying combat, that problem was gone. Miss Schilling had fixed it. I never thought twice about diving on a German. That probably saved my life a dozen times." Squadron leader Douglas Bader, the legendary pilot who flew with 2 artificial legs, credited the restrictor with changing his tactics completely. Before shilling, we fought defensively. We were afraid of our own engines. After shilling, we fought the way fighter pilots are supposed to fight. Aggressive, committed, no hesitation. She gave us our confidence back. Pilot Officer Deere, the same man who'd unknowingly tested the first restrictor, became one of its most vocal advocates. "I didn't know I was the guinea pig until weeks later," Deere wrote in his memoirs. "When Schilling told me what she'd done, I wasn't angry. I was grateful. She took a risk on me so that thousands of other pilots wouldn't have to take the same risk. That takes courage." Luftwaffe intelligence noticed the change within weeks. After-action reports from April mentioned that British fighters were no longer breaking off diving attacks. The tactical advantage had evaporated. By May 1931, German